stone when I'm alone. My blessings get so blurred at the sound of your words. You're gonna need to be.
Thank you, folks. We are really excited to have here an amazing panel. First, I'm going to start with the director of the film, Gail Freedman. Gail, coming out. Editor of the film, Dina Potocki. Dina, thank you so much for being here. You'll recognize them from the film, Carmelo and Kendra Vurgos. Thank you so much for being with us. And to moderate, there's one more seat. Please welcome Maggie G. Mortali from NAMI-NYC. I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening. Thank you for being here. I'm Maggie Mortali. I'm the CEO of the National Alliance on Mental Illness of New York City, and I am just honored to be here tonight. Thank you so much for inviting me and for having me. And I thought what we'd do is I'll do some introductions first, and then we can go ahead and get started. I have some questions, and then we'll also open it up to the audience, too, if you have questions as well. So every day, we work alongside individuals and families that are navigating serious mental illness, and this film really reflects the realities that we see across our communities, both the strength of the families and then the gaps in the systems that are meant to support us. Tonight is really an opportunity to reflect on what we've seen and have a really grounded conversation about where we can go from here. So I'm joined here tonight by Gail Freedman, a New York City-based documentary filmmaker and director of No One Cares About Crazy People. Gail has spent 25 years as an award-winning filmmaker. She and her team produced the documentaries such as Making the 9/11 Memorial, Hot to Trot, Breaking the Silence Barrier, and many more. We're also joined by Dina Potocki, film editor for No One Cares About Crazy People, and Dina and Gail Freedman have been crafting films together for over 25 years. Most recently, the feature documentary Hot to Trot, and Dina's noteworthy credits among many include Making the 9/11 Memorial, The World Was Ours, and Out of the Shadows. We're also joined by Carmelo and Kendra. You'll recognize them from the documentary. Carmelo is a peer, a husband, and a father who was diagnosed with bipolar disorder in his early 20s. And Kendra is a family member, a wife and mother. I want to personally say how impactful and important your story is. And to see it on the big screen, I just want to say personally, we thank you. And with that, we'll get to our questions. So first, I wanted to ask, this film is deeply personal. So Gail and Dina, what drew you to tell the story? And then Carmelo and Kendra, what drew you to being part of this project?
Well, thank you. For me, I guess it was a three-headed motivation that began this process. One, when I was a baby in the business at CBS News, Ron Powers, who was at that point already a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, was working at CBS doing cultural commentary for Sunday Morning, and we met and became friends. And over the years, our paths diverged. We lived in different places, and I didn't really know about what had happened to his family, and came upon his book and immediately picked it up and could see that there was the germ of a film there, kind of the skeleton of a film. So that was the prime motivation at the beginning. I also had been a medical reporter early in my career, so I know just enough to be every doctor's nightmare. And my own mother lived with borderline personality disorder, so I brought that to the equation as well. So that was really where that led me to 5 years of doing this.
Well, actually, Gail and I worked on a lot of films together. So when part of it was just that she called me and told me about it, and I got involved in it from the very beginning, and that's how Gail and I work. So, like the first shoot that she ever did was in Vermont with Ron Powers and that family, and right away it was felt like a really fascinating, engaging, and also I know of people that live with bipolar and my family and stuff, so like made, you know, so right from the beginning it just resonated on so many different levels.
So for ourselves, Kendra's a mental health advocate for myself. So she got involved with Gail. Gail heard Kendra used to write blogs, and she read one of Kendra's blogs, and she was interested in learning more about it. So that's how they got in contact with each other, and I'll let her fill in some more.
So when Gail reached out to me, it was based off of a piece of my writing that she had seen. And when I started writing about my experience with being a caretaker for someone with a mental illness, I was kind of writing for myself. I was writing because, and I didn't think anyone was reading my blog. I didn't think anyone cared, but it was more so because it's a very lonely existence. So I started writing about it, and people started responding. And then that's just kind of how it all came about. But when Gail approached us and asked if we'd like to be part of this project, things were stable at that time. I didn't think, you know, we could have never had, I could have never thought that in the time that she was filming, our life was gonna unravel on film the way it had. But it actually brought more of a conversation, and it brought more truth to what we were going through, and more people that were just like us, and more of a community of people just like us. And you do start to realize you're not alone. There's a lot of families navigating. Pretty much everyone that we talk to has a story of someone that's been affected by mental illness. And for the caretakers, it's a very, very heavy thing. For families and children, it's very, very heavy. So it's just kind of all lent itself to telling our story that's still in the making, our story that's still kind of being written. We don't know what the ending is yet. But as it was evolving, it felt like it was still important to tell our truth and for people to kind of see the whole story of what it's like to live with someone with a mental illness.
I think one of the most striking elements of the film is just how much of the burden often falls onto families. And so, Carmelo and Kendra, what is one thing you'd like people to know about how mental illness affects families?
I would say that it's affected our marriage. I mean, it puts a tremendous strain on our relationship. I mean, I love my wife. She loves me. She's been there for me, but it definitely has put its test and its limits on our relationship. So I would say that that's one main area.
Sorry, I had to think for a second. So it really is, I think, like I said in the film, it's a whole, it doesn't affect just one person. When one person is, the family is sick, it's almost like everyone in the family is sick. Whether you have children, whether you have parents, no matter who you are, a family is a family, even if it's just two people. So the impact on the relationship, the supports that everyone in the family needs to navigate it, it's uncharted waters. Anytime someone goes into a mental crisis, you do not know what you're up against, what it's going to look like, what recovery is going to look like. You just don't know. You're figuring out as you go along. So it's just really important to have support. It's really important to have either support for yourself, to have knowledge of the mental health system where you live and what resources are available to you and what you can do for your loved one or your friend or anybody. It's just really important to have knowledge yourself to know how to kind of advocate any kind of challenges that you're going to face.
Yeah, I think one of the things about this film is that it's really spotlights the advocacy as part of this community. And I think oftentimes as family members, we sort of start by advocating for our loved ones, and then we become activists in this space. And so, Gail and Dina, you know, when you think about the families and the individuals in this film and elsewhere that are really pushing for change, what gives you hope in that movement?
Everything about that movement gives me hope, because I think that the love, the fierceness, the relentlessness are incredibly powerful. And I think that they're beginning to make a difference. I mean, we live in really challenging times, so who knows? But on good days, I feel like we're potentially at a tipping point in terms of people's understanding and awareness. And that's where change starts, right?
I totally agree with everything she said. No, really.
Not always.
But definitely not, but in this case. But really, what really struck me was all along was the courage, you know, and the endurance and the never giving up, of the Rippey family, and also, you know, you guys, the Vurgos, you've been through so much, but there's no giving up. You just keep going and doing really the best and hoping that you can make changes, you know, but change doesn't depend on the family, which is also, it's clear, and that's why they're looking to the bigger world. You know, you can take care of your loved ones as much as you want, but if the medical system doesn't work, then, you know, it's a really very hard battle. And therefore, the advocacy to make political change is critical for anything to work.
I think now we'd like to open it up for audience questions. So we have some running mics. Is that true? Yeah.
Thanks. Hello. I'm just curious what politically is going on in the state of New York in terms of progressing to the model in California.
Yeah, I'd say not much. No, I think, you know, we're really working hard at NAMI-NYC to advocate for peer response for in crisis. And so a lot of our work is with a group called CCIT, and we are really working hard to push legislation and policy to make sure that there's a peer response, a family response, when there's a mental health crisis, and that when someone, the film portrays this really nicely, when they call 988, that they're getting support for a mental health crisis, and that we're meeting that with a public health response, not one from law enforcement. And so at the city level, we've been advocating for that for many years. You know, we're very hopeful that we will start to see some real change. There's a project called Be Heard. It is not anywhere where it needs to be to scale this, and it needs a lot of reforms. But we have just incredible community members that have come together to really, with peers and with families, to push legislation forward.
On the 988 front, some of you also may have just read the coverage in the New York Times about the study that was just done that actually has demonstrated that 988 can reduce suicide rates. So that's one really powerful piece of evidence that and that's all over. That's not just in California by any means.
And in an incredibly short amount of time, too. I think, you know, we've 988 rolled out federally. I mean, the 1-800 number has been around for a long time, but as a 3-digit number, it's only been around for the last handful of years. And so to see a reduction in rates, in suicide rates among young people in states where 988 was fully funded, is really incredible to see change happen that quickly. And I think in terms of, you know, from a policy and an advocacy standpoint, it's really wonderful when you see policy change and it really influence prevention in the way that it's meant to. So it's very hopeful.
It's really geeky policy stuff, which is why we didn't put it in the film. But one thing they did in California with 988 was, in order to have it not be dependent on the whims of the legislature from one year to the next, it's actually funded through a telecommunications tax, which means that that funding is guaranteed to be there.
Yeah, and we're working on doing that in New York as well.
So my question is related to something that was lightly touched on, which is, I'm curious if there's been any headway for individuals with SMI and other co-occurring intensive medical needs, like the young man, Mark, who was blind and also had, a traumatic brain injury. That's like a huge group of people that I feel like we've seen an incredible uptick since COVID of chronic illness and disability. And it seems like these people are really falling through the cracks. I'm actually one of these people, so I'm particularly interested in this particular aspect.
Do you want to go first?
Sure. I mean, I think we are seeing from COVID that the impact of sort of chronic health conditions on mental health and mental illness is quite pervasive. We also are seeing higher rates of loneliness and isolation and helplessness among youth and young adults. And so it's really going to take a larger response than just the medical community coming together. And I think these, at NAMI-NYC and other community organizations, we've adjusted much of the work to focus really upstream. And we've implemented a lot more youth-facing programming, a lot more sort of peer-focused work for our youth and young adults, and a way to really provide community and community supports to offset, where the gaps are in the systems.
I think it's particularly a problem right now with the Medicaid cuts, because Medicaid covers an enormous amount of health care across the board, and that's a place where huge advocacy is needed, because a lot of damage has been done. And, the whole notion that mental health care is health care, right? And parity is given lip service, but not necessarily a lot of real implementation. So if any of you are inspired to be advocacy oriented, there's some real needs there, because there's a lot of people falling between the cracks. And you're right, Mark was a pretty extreme example, but there's plenty of people. And Mark's death was so preventable and so unnecessary, but he didn't know that he needed to have his UTI and his pneumonia treated. He'd been hit by a car previously, which probably saved his life during COVID, because he was so badly hurt that, he was taken to the hospital whether or not he wanted to be. But, how many other people are just falling between the cracks? So you've highlighted a really huge issue.
You have to use it for accessibility purposes so that it shows up on captions.
I can't because I'm a Sabbath observer, but I can speak loudly.
It's an accessibility purpose.
It's recorded. Okay, I can tell you what it is, and then you can say.
Sure.
So I want to know, because I've worked in the Clubhouse movement for many years at programs like Fountain House, to what extent are people collaborating with Clubhouse movement, which has very strong advocacy on?
Okay. At what extent is Clubhouse working to...
Are you collaborating with Clubhouse movement, which has very strong advocacy on?
Yeah, I think Clubhouse is a fabulous movement, actually.
We can just speak from NAMI-NYC. Yes, we are very connected with our Clubhouse community across all 5 boroughs.
What is it?
Sure, yeah. So Clubhouse, there are programs across the city for peer workforce and peer support, people living with mental illness to build community and really sort of provide a peer workforce.
It gives people both a physical and a social and an overall support system. There's literally a brick and mortar place where people can gather, they can get job training, they can work with each other in many different ways, and sometimes there's housing built in, and it's a national model.
Yes, education as well, and food prep and meals and community. It's really community building.
Hi. First of all, I thought it was an excellent film in terms of showing a lot of the issues that are there. It's a space that I work in professionally in terms of advocacy. But I'm wondering if you started the film or if you would analyze after the film is over, whether you would say you had a particular viewpoint. It seems to me that this was very much directed towards supporting what's going on in California, supporting a forced treatment model, and there was some amount of discussion about voluntary treatment, but it felt like there was much more emphasis, I think everybody would agree, on the model that's out in California, and we do have models like that here in terms of both inpatient and outpatient treatment. And I'm just wondering sort of what sent you in that well, first of all, if you agree with my analysis that the film had that bent to it, and if that was your intention from the beginning.
I only partly agree with what you said. I mean, I think if you had asked me going into this, I'm a left-leaning progressive, and I probably, if you had asked me, would have said no one should ever be treated against their will. But I think the word nuance kept coming up for me throughout the process of us making this film. And the fact that the word language can be really loaded, and forced is a really loaded word. And I think you get to know enough people who live with these disorders and their family members, and you realize that it's not a one-size-fits-all answer. And that is voluntary treatment better? Yeah, absolutely. I think we can all agree on that. But sometimes maybe people need some extra help to get to the point where they can have more agency in terms of deciding what they want to do or what they don't want to do. So I guess what I hoped was that this would provoke a kind of dialogue about these questions, as opposed to saying, yes, I'm in favor of forced treatment. Because that's certainly, I don't think where we were coming from, but I think we need to have a complicated, nuanced conversation about it.
Okay, I'll have a conversation with you at some point.
I'd love that.
It looked different on the film, I think.
I think we're just taking one more question.
Yeah.
Hi, good evening. Thank you so much for presenting this documentary, you and your team, and making us be more informed. I have family members with mental ailments, and one of them is quite young. Most of it comes out within your teenage years, that it amplifies. And one of the things mentioned in the documentary is, especially in California, where we see that they are more in tune with making sure that they pass some form of legislative laws for mental illnesses, is what we do not see in New York City, which is one of my relatives. They had to actually be forced by me writing something saying they need to take their meds, and after a while they were able to get the injectable. However, if I'm not there and they do not take the injectable, they will wind up like some of the other individuals, homeless, out on the streets, because they're not willing to do so. They don't believe they have a problem. So here's my concern and question to you. How do you, or is there something in place now when you see someone that is improving with either the medication or the injectable? How can a person who say that they're well, there's nothing wrong with them, how can you sustain it? How can someone listen to us to make sure that they stay on their medication so that they don't become a victim of Rikers Island or something else happens to them wherein they do not get the care and support that they need?
I don't think there's an easy answer to that.
No, I mean,
A microphone for accessibility. Excuse me, Martine.
Hi, everyone. I didn't have any questions. I have lots of comments, though. It's very difficult, I know from firsthand experience with my son, if a person is considered high functioning, to establish through the courts any kind of guardianship, whether it's informed decision making, whether there's collaboration between the patient and the parent, or the patient and caretaker, sibling, whatever. And I experienced that with my son. I've also experienced being completely cut out of the picture with hospital personnel during an inpatient stay, regular outpatient therapists, all because my son was 18 and he had his rights. My son has very little in the way of the ability to reflect and to know when he's not doing well until he gets to a certain point when it becomes obvious to him. So, two things. You can be cut out in a way, but you have the right to pick up a phone and give whatever and how much information you want to give to a medical provider, to a doctor at a hospital, to a social worker, to anyone. You have that right. Okay, so if you see with your family member them starting to show signs that they're not taking their meds, communicate. Some of my son included, some of people diagnosed are extremely intelligent and they are very capable of masking symptoms. I've experienced that to an extreme over the years, and it creates a lot of problems. Obviously, if they have professionals believing one scenario that's quite different from what reality was and how that person ended up under care in the first place. But you have that right. You always have that right. HIPAA laws, fine, but you have that right. Also, deeming somebody a danger to themselves or a danger to others. You have the right to tell authorities, police, everyone.
Okay, I'll also recommend to, because we're going to wrap things up, thank you everyone. I will also encourage you to reach out to NAMI-NYC. We have a helpline that can support you in that, and then we also have family support groups and family-to-family classes that can connect you with other families that are going through something similar. So we can follow up after with that. Thank you so much, Gail. I know you wanted to.
Thank you, everyone, for attending. Thank you again to our panelists. I know there were a lot of questions. Hopefully, if the panelists have a couple more minutes, you can come up to them afterwards. But again, we are so appreciative for you being here for the ReelAbilities Film Festival. We're just getting started. There's more happening this week. If you go to reelabilities.org/New York, you can see the full schedule. But one thing that I want to bring your attention to tonight is this film is part of the Rotten Tomatoes Audience Award. There is a poster outside as you're exiting, going to the elevator, where you can scan a QR code and you can cast your vote for this film. And another thing, so a lot of the films from the festival this year are on ReelAbilities Stream, which is on our website, and they will be available online until May 3rd. So if there are more people that you want to see the film that didn't get a chance to make it out tonight, please encourage them to check out ReelAbilities Stream. Thank you all for attending, and have a good night. Get home safe.